Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. It's Wayback Wednesday. Just gonna ramble. Now this is a request video. Angel is working on her first members video. It's extra long, so if you're not a member, check it out. Or if you're a member, check it out. If you're not a member, look at our memberships. Just kidding. I know those cost, and not everybody can afford to do it, so no pressure. Just let you know they're there. And that the first video for that is coming up today. And we're going to do a shout out for our individual, and on Friday we'll shout out for everybody. Ready? Okay. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friend. Let's see who it is today. You spin me right round, baby, right round. Like a record player, right round, bang, bang. Yoga! Okay, so here we go. Yoga with Goga is begins with a cry for help. Despite fleeing his maiden class, he eventually fell in love with magic. That undoing Ernst's by limits motivate him to enroll for his yoga teaching training. I guess you guys can guess, he does yoga. He is great. I used to be flexible. I still am to some sort, but I cannot do the things that he does. So if you're into yoga, if you're curious about yoga, or if you just want to watch somebody do things that you cannot do, check him out. He's great. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. All right, Mr. Bud.
All right, class. Now, for those of you who like to sleep during science, get a pillow, because this is going to be incredibly boring. We had a note come into one of our chats when one of my videos was playing, and they had mentioned an episode that happened involving Kodak and nuclear weapons. And it was kind of an interesting little feed. I want to thank the fellow for putting that up, because there's actually there's two parts to this.
Uh-oh.
The first part, and this kind of dates back to one of my earlier topics when we were talking about the Marie Curie and the her Nobel Prize, and the fact that she now rests in a lead coffin because well, she's glow in the dark. Can't even read her cookbooks because they're radioactive. But for the layman's terms, let's go ahead and have some fun with this. You talk about things being radioactive, and for the most simple terms, all items that are radioactive go through a phase of decay, which basically means that the unstable atomic nucleus loses energy by radiation. It disperses. Containing unstable nuclei is considered radioactive, and they usually come out with three types of decay: alpha, beta, and gamma. So keep those three words in mind. And it all involves emitting of particles. Weak force is the mechanism that is responsible for the beta decay, while the other two are governed by electromagnetism and nuclear force. Think of a nucleus like a baseball with a lot of little tiny balls. And normally they're held in pretty tight, but when you've got radioactive material, usually what's going to happen is something is going to cause some of those atoms to pop out and go, start flying across. And to a degree, that is what comes out of the decay effect, is that it's basically making that nucleus more stable. Some of the radioactive material, if if you lived a few thousand years, would eventually decay down to something stable like lead. But some of the material has such a long half-life. You're talking thousands and thousands of years for it to make that next step down. Now, some things do have a very short half-life. Some of them have it maybe a few minutes. But a lot of it all depends on those, materials. But, going down to the simple basis of what is, radioactive, back in 1896, a guy named Henry Becquerel and Marie Curie were working with phosphorus materials. These materials glow in the dark after exposed to light. Works really good in Halloween.
Woo.
And what was weird is that it says the materials glow in the dark after exposure to light, and Becquerel suspected that the glow produced in a cathode ray tube by X-rays might be associated with phosphorescence. He wrapped a photographic plate in black paper, placed various phosphorant salts on it, and the results were negative until he used uranium salts. The uranium salts caused a blackening of the plate in spite of the plate being wrapped in black paper, and these radiations were given the name Becquerel rays. Well, it soon became clear that the blackening of the plate had nothing to do with the phosphorescence, as the blackening was also produced by non-phosphorescent salts of uranium and by metallic uranium. It became clear from these experiments that there was a form of invisible radiation that could pass through paper and causing the plate to react as exposed to light. Now, at first, it seemed as though this new radiation was similar to the then recently discovered X-rays. Further research by Becquerel, Ernest Rutherford, Paul Villard, Pierre Curie, Marie Curie, and others showed that this form of radioactivity was significantly more complicated. Rutherford was the first one to realize that all such elements decay in accordance with the same mathematical exponential formulas. For those of you who failed algebra, we're all screwed. Rutherford and his student, Frederick Soddy, what is Soddy? Were the first to realize that many decay processes resulted in the transmutation from one element to another. Subsequently, the radioactive displacement law of Farjons and Soddy were formulated to describe these products of alpha and beta decay. Well, the early researchers had discovered that many other chemical elements besides uranium have radioactive isotopes. A systematic search for total radioactivity in uranium ores also guided Pierre and Marie Curie to isolate two new elements, polonium and radium. Now, except for the radioactivity of radium, the chemical similarity of radium to barium made the two elements difficult to distinguish. Marie and Pierre Curie's study of radioactivity is an important factor in science and medicine. After their research on Becquerel's rays led them to the discovery of both radium and polonium, they coined the term radioactivity to define the emission of ionizing radiation by some heavy elements. Later, the term was generalized for all elements. Their research on penetrating rays in uranium and the discovery of radium led to an era of using radium as a treatment for cancer. Their exploration of radium could be seen as the first peaceful use of nuclear energy and the start of modern nuclear medicine. Now, there's going to be stupid people out there, kids. Don't be stupid. Dangers of ionizing radiation due to radioactivity in X-rays were not immediately recognized, of course,
What?
It's something new. Discovery of X-rays by William Roentgen, that last name is going to become very popular, in 1895 led to widespread experimentation by scientists, physicians, and inventors. Many people began recounting stories of burns, hair loss, and worse in technical journals as early as 1896. Get a load of these two. In February of that year, Professor Daniel and Dr. Dudley of the Vanderbilt University performed an experiment involving X-raying Dudley's head that resulted in hair loss. Oops. A report by Dr. H.D. Hawks of his suffering severe hand and chest burns in an X-ray demonstration was the first of many other reports in Electrical Review. Now, other experimenters, including Elio Thomson and Nikola Tesla also reported burns. Thomson deliberately exposed a finger to the X-ray tube over a period of time and suffered pain, swelling, and blistering. Gotta suffer for science. Other effects, including ultraviolet rays and ozone, were sometimes blamed for this damage, and many physicians still claim that there were no effects from X-ray exposure at all. Despite this, there were some early systematic hazard investigations, and as early as 1902, William Herbert Rawlins wrote that almost despairingly that his warnings about dangers involving the careless use of X-rays were not being heeded, either by the industry or by his colleagues. By this time, Rawlins had proved that X-rays could kill experimental animals, cause severe reactions in pregnant guinea pigs, and that they could even kill the unborn.
Oops.
He also stressed that animals would vary in susceptibility to the external action of X-light, and warned that these differences considered when patients were treated by means of X-rays. This is why when they give you X-rays, they usually give you a lead bib, or they tell you not to have X number X-rays in a given year. Now, radioactive substances. Now, for those of us who are old like me, way back in high school, the atomic chart used to only go up to 106. And usually those names were so messed up you couldn't even pronounce them right. And I'm not even going to try. I'm sorry. But interestingly enough, the radioactive substances, a number of these elements, usually are, to say the least, a lot of them are simple isotopes. They don't stay radioactive for very long. They break down, some of them in less than a day. They lose their half-life. A lot of them were made strictly in labs. They didn't serve any other major purpose other than to say, well, we now have, according to this happy little chart, 118 elements in the given chart. Number one, of course, is, go all the way back, hydrogen. Now, however, the biological effects of radiation due to radioactive substances is less easy to gauge. This gave the opportunity for many physicians and corporations to market radioactive substances as patent medicines.
Well, that sounds safe.
Yeah. Does anybody else see this as being a problem?
No, sounds like a good plan.
Now, for those of you who have seen more recent history and news, the story of the radium girls, the girls who basically were painting dials and the arms of watches with radium so that they would glow in the dark, and then they came down with cancer. I'm going to say this product, and I want to see how many people actually want to try this. A radium enema.
Well then.
No.
Glowing poop.
Yeah. Radium-containing waters to be drunk as tonics. Marie Curie, in her intelligence, protested against this sort of treatment, warning that radium is dangerous in untrained hands. Well,
what?
Heaven forbid.
Why would that be?
I don't know. Curie later died from aplastic anemia caused by the exposure to ionizing radiation, and by the 1930s, a number of cases of bone necrosis and death from radium treatment enthusiasts, radium-containing medicinal products, had been largely removed from the market, commonly referred to as radioactive quackery.
Quackery.
Quack, quack.
Mm-hmm.
Now, only a year after Roentgen's discovery of X-rays, the American engineer Wolfram Fuchs gave what is probably the first protection advice, but was not until 1925 that the first International Congress of Radiology was held and considered establishing international protection standards. The effects of radiation on genes, including the effect of cancer risk, were recognized much later. In 1927, Hermann Joseph Mueller published a research showing the genetic effects, and in 1946 was awarded the Nobel Prize on Physiology or Medicine for his findings. The second ICR was held in Stockholm in 1928, and the proposed adoption of the Roentgen Unit and the International X-ray and Radium Protection Committee was formed. Now, Rolf Sievert, there's another name dealing with radiation, was named chairman, but a driving force was George Kay of the British National Physical Laboratory. The committee would later meet in 1931, 34, and 37. Well, after World War II, the increased range and quantity of radioactive substances being handled as a result of military and civil nuclear programs led to large groups of occupational workers and the public being potentially exposed to harmful levels of ionizing radiation. Now, with that happy little tidbit, and what we had mentioned, one of our buddies in the chat had thrown up this happy little topic about how back when we were dealing with the atomic bomb, when they were being developed and tested in the United States, the government tried to keep them secret. However, one camera company discovered kind of a creative way what the government was up to months before anyone else. Now, first test we had was Trinity. In 1945, there were some of these nuclear weapons tests, and these tests first took place on the 16th of July, 1945, was one of only 3 short weeks before the famous atomic bombs were dropped in Japan, ending World War II. Well, when these nuclear tests were being done, though, more things were happening than just giant explosions. Nuclear bombs notably release radioactive isotopes that propagate through the atmosphere and are picked up by wind currents and carried far away. Well, now, back up for a second. How was the U.S. government even planning on keeping the largest explosions known to mankind secret for the first place? Well, they were planning on lying about it.
What?
In this case, they said that they had an ammo dump blow up. Well, the Trinity test occurred way out in the middle of nowhere, U.S. Air Force Base in Alamogordo, New Mexico, about 120 miles from the population center of Albuquerque. Now, despite the distance, those living in the city, as well as those living closer to the site, heard the explosion and, again, blamed it on an accidental explosion of conventional explosives. Nothing to bat an eye about, especially during the height of World War II. Blow-ups happened.
What?
However, covering up the sound was the easy part. It was the fallout, the dispersal of radioactive isotopes, that was basically impossible to cover up. Lucky for the government, radioactive isotopes are invisible, and most people do not have their own Geiger counters, so they didn't have to worry about covering up their invisible but still potentially dangerous radioactive tracks. But herein lies the problem. While radioactive isotopes are invisible to humans, they can still have a devastating effect. However, these health issues don't usually show up for years or decades, but photographic films, which are highly sensitive to radioactive energy, can. Also, a quick tidbit. Remember how I mentioned the 3 types of radioactivity?
Mm-hmm.
Alpha radiation particles can actually be stopped by a sheet of paper.
Ooh.
Real simple. The second one, the betas, those you got to go a little deeper. Aluminum foil, that'll resist that. Gamma radiation, a little bit harder to work with, because either you have to go with lead, water, something dense. But anyway, Kodak's headquarters at this time was about 1,900 miles away from the site of the tests in New Mexico, and almost immediately after the Trinity explosions, Kodak started receiving a much higher than average number of complaints from customers that their film was foggy on being developed. Small black dots were showing up all over the film, essentially developing the film in sporadic areas. This was perplexing to Kodak scientists, as the factories where the film was produced were designed specifically to prevent this kind of defect and contamination. Well, the film produced by Kodak was having issues in it with X-ray film, which was far more sensitive than regular photographic film that you might be familiar with. Even just small exposure to light could render it basically unusable. That meant Kodak spent a significant amount of effort trying to make sure these films' packagings protected it from all these dangers during shipping. One of the efforts Kodak took was making sure to control the entirety of the manufacturing process for its packaging materials, ensuring that there was no radioactive contamination along the way. And this meant that Kodak also owned and operated the paper mills that produced their cardboard packaging. Notably, it was located in Vincennes, Indiana. A Kodak scientist by the name of Julian H. Webb took it upon himself to investigate where the fogging in the film was coming from. He eventually traced it back to the packaging produced at the Vincennes mill. Now, as he investigated further, he found that spots weren't being caused by radium, an element that was a common issue for Kodak at the time. Rather, they were being caused by a new radioactive isotope, one that Kodak had never accounted for. As he was still investigating samples from the Indiana plant, he got word that the same issues were occurring at an Iowa plant. These plants were 450 miles away, but the issues and isotopes were practically identical. Red flag number 1. Upon further investigation, Webb discovered that the flaws were coming from the beta particle radiation, not alpha particle. Beta particle can penetrate skin, paper, and other materials with ease and is considered to be dangerous. Alpha particle radiation, on the other hand, can be stopped by paper and is generally not considered dangerous unless it's ingested. Red flag number 2. As Webb began investigating this further, he discovered that the half-life of the particle is 30 days, meaning the source of all this radiation had to have occurred recently. Notably, this discovery would eventually allow Webb to later identify the particles as cerium-141, one of the most common products of nuclear fission. 3 strikes, you're out. At this point, the metaphorical film of Julian Webb was developed. He concluded that there was no possible way for this contamination to have come from anything other than an atomic bomb detonation. Released in a report in 1949, he states, "The most likely explanation of the source of this radioactive contaminant appears to be wind-borne radioactive fission products delivered from the atom bomb detonation in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. Well, notable here is the publishing date of Webb's research. He discovered that the likely source of radiation soon after the first test, yet he waited to release his research. That's likely due to the fact that he recognized how significant his findings was in relation to national security. Webb himself had formerly worked on the Manhattan Project. Now, the fallout from this, backing up for a moment from James Webb's investigation, Webb's discovery that the fallout from the Trinity test had traveled hundreds and possibly thousands of miles across the U.S. wasn't a fluke. In fact, scientists working on the Manhattan Project had predicted this. Several of the leading researchers in the project recommended the U.S. government establish nuclear testing sites on the East Coast to prevent air currents from carrying the fallout west across the entire United States. It was also recommended that the tests be carried out at least 150 miles away from civilian populations.
Whoops.
Well, despite these early recommendations by the researchers, the government chose to test not only in New Mexico, but also at the Nevada Proving Grounds, which is only 100 miles from Las Vegas.
Well then.
Viva Las Vegas.
Glowy Las Vegas.
Glowy. You're going to lose. You're going to win. No, you're definitely going to lose. It's more likely the choice was made by the military, primarily because New Mexico site was far more conveniently located, which would allow for faster testing and development. Downplaying the negative health effects of the radiation was common practice at the time from the U.S. government, though. In January of 1951, the first of many atomic bombs were detonated at the Nevada Proving Ground site. After these tests, the Geiger counter at Kodak's headquarters in Rochester, New Jersey, a sprawling complex 2,500 miles away, started reading 25 times above background radiation.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, that's just all the way across the country. Now, this worried Kodak greatly and even contacted the Atomic Energy Commission to raise concern. However, the commission told them not to worry, even allowed Kodak to make a press release about the radiation. Now, Kodak at this point was frustrated. After complaining to both the National Association of Photographic Manufacturers and the Atomic Energy Commission and being dismissed, the company threatened to sue the government for damage to their products. The government, still wanting to keep their testing secret, came to an agreement with Kodak and the film industry. Kodak would be provided dates of future tests, predicted fallout patterns, so that the company could take precautions to protect their film. Kodak's side of the bargain was that they were required to keep everything they discovered secret.
Nope.
Yeah, you didn't see anything. Nothing's glowing out here.
Secret.
By the way, all your film just got shot. They agreed to secrecy. Now, Kodak kept the government's secrets in exchange for the knowledge that allowed them to plan and protect their products. This wasn't necessarily malice on Kodak's part. They were simply trying to stay in business, and the U.S. government threatening to keep them quiet.
The government? No.
The government? No. Would our government do something like that? No.
They wouldn't do that.
Rather, the responsibility to make the dangers from the test public largely fell to the government. The task had failed.
Oh, no.
Now, fast forward, the late 1990s, the National Cancer Institute had released findings linking the Trinity nuclear test to tens of thousands of instances of thyroid cancer and other negative health effects. After this report, congressional hearings were held questioning government officials that kept the test secret at the time. The hearings were made to the public that almost every single person in America that was alive during these tests was at some kind of risk from negative effects of the fallout. Because, I mean, you think about wind drifts, everything goes west to east in the United States, pretty close. And if you blew something up in Nevada, right across the border is Utah, Colorado, Nebraska and Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas. It drifts. And that's if you don't have one of those fun storms that swirls the dust in a reverse formation, cause even worse problems. Now, the thing that remains unclear is why the government did not warn people of these dangers. It was clear to the public the bombs had been dropped on Japan, that the U.S. had dropped were nuclear weapons. However, it wasn't until 1997 that the public really became aware of the dangers from these tests, or just how many tests have been conducted close to the population centers. Sometime, for you folks listening at home, pop onto Google Earth and go look around some of those sites. The craters are still there. There's also the actual Trinity test. If I remember it, somebody had mentioned that you can only go there 2 weeks out of the whole year. It's still radioactive. But, aware of these dangers of the test, or just how many tests have been conducted close to population centers, in many cases, there were possible alternative testing sites, and the precautions that could have been taken, alas, secrecy was the easier choice. Don't worry about the glow-in-the-dark effects.
Right? Why would you worry about that?
But, later on, they did do some adjustments. For example, they started doing underground testing, which, for the primary idea is that with all the radioactivity already packed under the dirt, it's not going to get into the air. It's not going to spread. They also tried doing underwater or, out in the Pacific shots. Again, it's still going to wreck some of the land, but the idea is that it's not going to cause as big of a problem as what Trinity did with a cloud of radioactive debris floating around. So Kodak basically decided to make a deal with the government. They found out what they were going to do and tried to protect their investment. And the rest of us wound up going in the dark because of it.
I don't glow in the dark.
No, not much.
What?
But this was a happy little article I found off of interestingengineering.com, a happy little webpage that I like to peruse for information. But, folks, this has been Joe from the bearded one from the History Files and the Blood Files. You folks have a good one, and we'll talk to you next week.